Drop.
Is this the fucking mic?
Drop.
This is exactly what I should be doing.
What's up, and welcome to this week's episode of The Drop, your weekly source for all things NFT and crypto art, as well as upcoming drops by notable people in the MoGraph industry. I'm Matt Milstead. Joining me, as always, is Dave Koss. Joining us this week, CEO of Otoy and Render, Jules Urbach. So super excited to talk crypto art, NFTs, Solana, all of the above.
Yeah, we'll keep the regular drop stuff to a minimum today. Just quick
it's actually like I just wanted to instead of going through everyone. Luckily, I didn't see any big drops on Maker's Place this week, but I just wanted to do a quick couple mentions on some of the artists dropping this week on Nifty Gateway. First one is Philip Hodis. He's doing a drop today on Nifty Gateway, and he's been posting some of his stuff lately. Really cool stuff. Philip does just amazing work. Super excited about his drop. And then next up on the first, we've got Gavin Shapiro is doing another drop, which is fantastic. This one is like a collector's only, like, drawing for a zoetrope, like an actual physical zoetrope, which is really cool. Like, he teased one of these a while ago, like, and I believe it wasn't an actual physical thing, but I think these are, and it's super cool. So that drop happens December 1st.
Has he moved on to penguins now? He's moved to penguins.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah, okay. No more.
Yeah. All right.
So yeah, that's it as far as the big drops. We've got a couple community drops going on. The first one is from Gustav. Gustav says, I have brand new piece dropping on Known Origin on Tuesday, December 7th. Distance/Dissociate is a new cinematic album cover from my latest album of the same name. Ooh, that's really pretty. That's super cool. So yeah, that piece is up there. And then we had one from Garrett. Garrett said, hey, Matt and Dave, I just dropped 2 new 4K pieces on Foundation. If you dig it, I would love to and appreciate your thoughts. Had a blast doing these. Homage to one of my favorite cartoon worlds. Yeah, when the collection is done, there will be 6 swords made. Decided to drop the first 2 now. Released a teaser trailer also on Twitter.
Or was it Adventure Time?
I think it's Adventure Time, yeah.
That's interesting. Oh, that's
yeah,
fun.
That's fun.
Huh.
So there you go.
Cool.
And then if anyone's interested, I also still have my piece available on Foundation.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. What is your asking price?
It's
on
like
that?
0.65 ETH, I think. So, ETH has been fluctuating lately. Been going in between 4,000 and 4,700. So, there. Yeah.
Cool. Well, before we get into everything, I think, oh boy, Dorpy's here. Hey Matt, hey Jules, happy holidays.
Wow, I was really hoping we'd skip Dorpy this week.
Nope. I'm assuming we're talking about render engines and not the type of rendering that they did to my friend Harold the horse. May he rest in peace.
Oh,
I just needed to stop by real quick and tell you a little trick that I learned this week. I had no idea that you could swap crypto for tokens right in your MetaMask. Just log in and hit swap. It's that easy. I know most of you know that, but I didn't. And I know some other tricks too. Want to see me shake? Just open up my Coinbase. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I found out this info from a purebred friend of mine. He's not an actual purebred, though. We just call him that because he eats too many carbs.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay, bye.
Oh, thank God it's over.
Shout out to Richard Day for helping me with some Dorpy jokes as well. So, yes, in all seriousness, though, let's get to the good stuff.
Yes.
Here's the thing, and I wanted to talk about this. We're going to talk about the metaverse. We're going to talk about Render and now as a token, of course.
Yes.
And it's just the future and NFTs and all this fun stuff. And here's what I like about Render Token is there's this economy around it. If you're watching the earlier part of the podcast here, then about everything that's kind of going on. And you can spend Render you can render something and get tokens back in exchange. It's kind of this like awesome ecosystem. It's like a self-sustaining ecosystem. And when you're talking about, you're hearing about the metaverse, You're hearing about what it's going to do and how it's going to make certain industries like independent and give people stakes and everything. It's just such a great ecosystem, because it's just like this cyclical thing. You know, especially when it's not just Octane either, right? We're talking about, like, this is other render engines. This is not any, but a lot of the engines and apps that artists are using. So it's something that, you know, has this economy behind it. So so we talked about Render, you know, Render Network and putting your, you know, sending stuff to Render. Let's talk a little bit about the token itself, because I think that there are a lot of people that are interested in what this is, especially if they're coming from maybe an area where they know nothing about crypto at all.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, that's a whole, you know, huge topic of conversation. So, you know, starting from what the utility of the Render Network is, right, which is to provide all this GPU power to artists and provide this kind of massive compute power, you know, that's very easy, I think, for an artist to understand. But I think, you know, certainly now that we've been doing this for years, I mean, Render did launch officially, you know, out of beta last year, but before that it was in testing. Crypto is something that I think it's still unfamiliar to a lot of artists, right? I mean, they look at, yeah, they understand Bitcoin and Ethereum as a unit of currency, but what's the rest of this crypto stuff? How do smart contracts work? Now, granted, we do now live in a year where NFTs have just completely transformed the possibilities for how artists can make money. And we've been at the center of that with everyone from, you know, we have probably thousands of Octane artists that are doing incredibly well, selling their artwork created in Octane, you know, on different NFT marketplaces. But Render is a little bit different. The Render token itself was designed to be a utility token, meaning that it's not necessarily a token you buy for speculation or cash. It represents a unit of compute power, or more precisely, however big the network is in terms of its total, you know, if it's you know, Skynet or it's the world computer. There's only a certain number of these tokens. There's 500 million, half a billion or so. So however big the network is, the token represents a, you know, fractionalized part of that. You know, and that's how the system works from a crypto perspective. So you know, what we've done is that the tokens, when you get a token or earn a token, it is generally it represents a minimum amount of work, so which we tie to the dollar cost of what it would take to render this in Octane Bench, which is the, you know, compute power needed to render in Octane, and it's also used by other renderers as well that we've added to the Render Network. If it costs $1 to render in Amazon, the Render Network should be able to render it for $1 as well. And the token was essentially saying, rather than spending dollars, spend tokens, right? What's been interesting is that we were able, with the capacity on the network, to take models that were in theory available on Amazon, like, oh, if they're spot instant pricing, it's 10 cents instead of $1. And we're able to offer, like, here's tier 3, it's 1/8 the cost, it's 11 cents on the dollar. But unlike Amazon, we have those GPUs available, so you could render those jobs. And the payout in tokens, you know, no matter what the price fluctuation was actually, I think, enough for people to still make money and make more money than mining cryptocurrencies like Ethereum. So there's a lot of interest, people just wanting to make money and add their GPU power to something that's crypto-centric, like the Render Network, to earn. And that's important, because what we're trying to do is we're not trying to displace the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Googles. They exist for a reason. They'll always be there. But there is a hard limit on how fast they're growing versus how many users need GPU power. And we've learned that firsthand when we were developing Auric, which is a precursor to Render. It was running on AWS and the public cloud providers. And one customer in one night would take all of Amazon GPUs, thousands for a 10K C4D render, for example. Wow. And there's no way to build a business around that. And there's certainly there's like a lot of these whale jobs, but the idea with Render is that if you're looking to participate in earning money with your latent GPU power, you could do that. And that it's something that there's so many millions of GPUs that are out there initially set up to mine Ethereum. And with that kind of going away, with Ethereum 2 going to proof of stake, and just with a lot of GPU power out there anyway for people having their GPUs, not always using them, even if they're artists, right, to render, it's a really good system. And I think that somewhere in the other side of that is, if you earn those crypto tokens, right, you can also then spend them on rendering. And a lot of artists on the Render Network are also miners, in other words, or what we call node operators, which is they lend their GPU power back in. So there is this sort of virtuous cycle. But I think that there's a whole other audience that we've sort of opened up to, which is the crypto audience, which is why I want to basically participate in this system. And I don't know anything about art or digital art at all. And I've seen a lot of those users become subscribers to Octane and Otoy and all the likes, because they want to learn about the other side of the system. And I think that and similarly, so there is sort of this larger spread. But what's happened is, I think, the free market decides the price of a render token. I mean, that's essentially a value of what is the total value of the system divided by, I mean, I guess there's only 100 million in circulation. So it's essentially 0.001% per token, something along those lines. What is the, that price has fluctuated from 3 cents to now, I think it's like $6 or something. And that's something that's, we've had to sort of account for. We are accounting for the new token economic model that'll make it so that if you're an artist, it'll be straightforward. You'll get a stable amount of Octane Bench per amount of value you put in. And we've been working on that new token economic model for better part of this year, and it should be out by the end of this year. And that'll cover a lot more deep exploration of how the render network is going to be working for payouts and for ingestion going forward. But today, artists have a really simple onboarding system, which they can pay with a credit card, and we have a store of tokens that we then pay out to the node operators so that it stalls running on tokens. And we're going to basically improve that system further with a new token economics model so that everybody has a straightforward path to use and monetize their part of the render network.
And talk about your announcement. It was a few weeks ago now, I think, the Solana announcement, and why Solana?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a fascinating question. And certainly, for those that aren't familiar with crypto, Solana is another type of blockchain. You have Bitcoin, the original, that's like gold, and you have Ethereum, which is, the number 2, blockchain in terms of value. And that added, the ability to have programmable smart contracts. Most NFTs, most services are built on Ethereum, but Ethereum is pretty slow and it's super expensive. And anybody that's minted NFTs on what's called layer 1, which is the core Ethereum network, it destroys the environment, and it's expensive, and it's unusable for high-speed transactions. So, what's happened is that Ethereum itself, they're trying to fix that with what they're calling Ethereum 2.0, which is moving from a proof of work, which is just, slowing down the network and being expensive, to something that is, validated in a different way. That isn't ready yet. So in the meantime, other blockchains have emerged. We've partnered briefly with Algorand, which is a system that is meant to offer a different option. We also adopted layer 2, which is through a company, or blockchain service called Polygon, which is like a side chain. It has a lot less nodes, but you can run transactions faster, and then you can resolve them back on the Ethereum blockchain. And we added that because it was just impossible for us to run render and pay out people in a timely fashion. But none of those things solve the core problem, which is I have several things I need to see on the blockchain for me to build a business like Render, or even a decentralized organization, which is what Render truly is more than a business, on such a system. I need fast transaction speeds. I can't really depend on layer 2 or these side chains for this one simple reason, which is that if there's 80 nodes or some small number of nodes that are making this Polygon or Matic, the side chain operate really fast, that also means that you have 100 nodes in AWS, you can take over that network and you can steal people's NFTs, you can do all sorts of bad things. So security and speed have to both be there. And the problem with a lot of layer 2 solutions is they don't have the security part. And Solana, from my perspective, and from people that I would say, again, I keep saying they're smarter people than me that have validated this to my satisfaction, including Brendan Eich, who has a company called Brave. He created Mozilla, JavaScript, Firefox, like redefine the modern web, and was one of the first people to get us ourselves into crypto. I mean, he launched Basic Attention Token 2017, helped us launch Render that same year, and he announced at the same conference I was at that he's moving basically to Solana. And for him, it was the security and the speed, and those things are so important that it feels like Solana is going to be that number 3 blockchain after Bitcoin and Ethereum. Those other 2 aren't going away, but if you need something better, faster, different, more programmable, Solana is pretty incredible. And the tech guys behind it used to be our ex-Qualcomm guys. Anthony is a genius. I mean, the stuff that you could do, not just on the network, but in terms of programming for it. You can write C++ code. You don't have to write some crazy scripting EVM language. You can depend on super fast transactions. It's got a built-in system so that you can pay with credit cards right from the get-go. And what's also interesting, one of the reasons why we picked them as a partner going forward is that they don't have a marketplace that's blessed by Solana necessarily, but they have a API mechanism called Metaplex, where you can build your own store and you can customize it. And they're defining that within the Solana blockchain, like they're doing with the credit card ingestion, so that this is important. Like most stores that we're seeing, or most artists are moving towards something where you have a virtual world that's your own collection of art, like a little mini metaverse, right? And you're seeing artists building that, and they want to be able to sell their artwork within that. And it's not easy to do that when you're doing a drop on Nifty or Makerspace or OpenSea. Those are kind of like legacy, sort of ways of selling anything. And I think that Metaplex is much more organic, it's much more customizable, and more importantly, all the asks we have, and we have a ton of asks because we haven't launched 90% of what we've built for NFTs and for how those work because we've been waiting for the blockchain piece to sort of catch up. The Metaplex team is like, we're going to add everything you guys want and more, and it's a true partnership. So I do think that if you want to eventually get into selling your digital art, or you want to build a marketplace of your own, or you want to use Render and really come up with custom, integrations for monetizing your art, Solana and Metaplex is going to be ready to go. And we'll support other things. It will work, of course, across chains. We're not dropping Ethereum or other chains, but there's no comparison, I think, to the performance and versatility that Solana is bringing us. So that and the security is pretty important. And the Render SDK itself, again, targeting Solana directly. So you'll be able to create pieces in the SDK that are securely run on chain. So if you want to have like a virtual world where the state of that world is determined by something on chain, that can be encoded into the Render SDK into that node.
Right.
Super powerful.
So if you want to make an NFT and you want to make it so it changes based on, I don't know, the weather or the time of day or the score of a football game, that's all going to be built in.
Yeah.
Like, what is the minting process going to be like in that aspect?
So the minting on Solana is thankfully, if you're using the Solana piece, is effortless. But even minting on Render is one thing people kind of forget is that every time you're rendering anything on Render, doing anything on Render where there's a transference of payment or value, the entire input stream into that is essentially on chain. So if you've ever used the Render network, you can essentially call up the receipt of your render and say this is the NFT of it. I mean, there's no extra NFT step. Now, if you want to mint that on Nifty Gateway or on OpenSea or on Solana even, sure. But by default, everything you're doing on Render is already recorded on chain, and there's already a receipt of that. In other words, when you re-upload a file again to render it as a 3D model, for example, if it's already been uploaded once, the hash of that is already on the Render ledger, and we can and are storing those things opt-in, right, on Arweave, which is an option where you can, or IPFS, which is the blockchain storage system. And those things allow you to basically already pre-mint everything. It's called lazy minting, where it's like you've already created the NFT and it's already all there. It's a question of when do you want to sell it and how do you want to sell it? And if you've already made an NFT, can you actually then reverse that and say, oh, my Beeple NFT, or Beeple, right, who's sort of our space monkey for some of these ideas, his NFTs were long out of the gate sold, when we now have something called the Beeple archive, which is basically anything we can then add on Render. Now we have C4D file support. The other thing we're adding is Photoshop layers also on Render, so you can do the Photoshop filters live in there. And at Oracles, those things can all be rebuilt on Render, and the proof of Render becomes more valuable than the proof of NFT ownership, which could, of course, be anybody uploading an image saying, I'm this artist or whatever. When you have proof of Render, you can re-render that. You can make the job itself an NFT, or you can, as Mike was saying at the MoGraph, Camp MoGraph, right, where he may be selling a few NFTs a year, but he's doing obviously hundreds of pieces of art. I mean, at least 360 something every year, every day, right? I mean, those things should be on chain, and they represent his body of work. That's where we want to sort of build this sort of healthy layer. That's sort of this metaverse layer too, where before you sell something, if you just want to build your brand or build your identity on chain, like it's cheap enough now, and it's even going to be more trivial with Solana, where you can do all that, and then you can think about how you want to monetize and when you want to monetize these pieces. But that layer, this archiving layer, where your entire work ever done on Render, all those pieces can be sort of be put into this archive system. I think it's fundamental to create a sort of, one, a record of you as an artist or creator, and two, coming up with, ways that are beyond just NFTs, right? Where you're selling an image to things that are truly, totally different ways of selling yourself as an artist that combine the best of what I think NFTs can offer with the best of what, Patreon and other things have, support, and even collaborative pieces become a lot easier. So those are all, those are deep areas of discussion we can dive in further into, but that's kind of where we see digital art, crypto art, and the systems that we're building to support it heading.
Question on the Solana front. So, correct me if I'm wrong, because I very well could be. Render was originally built off of the Ethereum network, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then did you switch that over at a certain point? So
we switched it once already to Matic, so
yes.
Polygon. And I'll be honest, that has not gone as well as we'd like, because the truth is there's two wallets now. There's two base, and it's like, holy crap, that is confusing. Even if Matic is faster, it hasn't been great, honestly. And what we're going to do with Solana is, unfortunately, or but it's a step. But we're going to add Solana. So you're going to have. I mean, we'll probably at that point maybe retire the Matic option, and we'll just keep ETH if you have it. So we'll have these 3 options. I mean, it's not like we already don't have 2 blockchains. The Solana team's already taken everything that we've ever done on ETH and already given us a Solana version for render. So we have 0 code to write. It's already done. I just want to make that switch over painless for artists. And when we do it or when we add it, I mean, there's going to be a point where you'll have both the Ethereum pieces of render running, but it's not going to make that much of a difference. Artists generally and node operators don't truly care as long as their wallet can be hooked up and they can make money from running the nodes. I mean, ultimately, that's all you really need to be a node operator. And whether those are paid out on a wallet that supports Solana or Ethereum is not a huge deal. I think for the node operators, artists typically, I have to say, they still want to pay us in dollars and with credit cards. So actually going to Solana and adding that means that we can actually on chain take credit card payments instead of having to store tokens and get your
Cool.
All that stuff becomes a little bit simpler. And I think that next year we're going to add Solana, and then we're going to keep there's something called a wormhole, which means that everything you've ever done on ETH can be exposed or connected to the Solana blockchain. But for newer things, like if you want to build a dynamic NFT or you want to build awesome things, for the metaverse, that is going to be on Solana. And yes, you'll have things that are stored, even our minting that we've done so far on ETH, they'll all be there. But I view NFTs themselves as so trivial. I mean, they're just pointers. I mean, even on OpenSea, you're just pointing back to something. Typically, that's not even on chain. It's like half the stuff is on a the Nifty Gateway server or something, right? It's like it's not even on the decentralized web. So all that needs to be redone. And the render system itself is sort of cross-chain. I mean, it has its own ledger, its own verification process that is verified in a smart contract on Ethereum, on Matic, and soon on Solana. But that's the least interesting part of it. I think the more interesting pieces are when you create art and you create modules and services and systems, impossible to do in both in code and in speed and in transaction volume on any other chain. And those, basically are added to the system, and all the benefits of Solana come with that next year. Then I think that organically you're just going to move everything over probably to Solana, and we'll keep the wormhole for any legacy data or assets or services that are running. But we've had a lot of experience. I mean, we still support older GPU drivers and things like that with older versions of Octane as we have to sort of pare those back and add new ones. And that's sort of a gradient or a great gray area of transition. But I do think that, everyone's sort of hungry for a better blockchain system than either layer 2 on ETH or layer 1 is delivering. So Solana is going to get us here next year. And there's tons of support coming from the team, from Raj, the co-founder of Solana. We've talked so much about the future. It's just incredible. I can't even begin to describe some of the bigger metaverse aspects and ideas that are floating around between all of this.
I'm assuming that will also speed up payments for node operators as well, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's instantaneous. I mean, that's what Matic was supposed to do. It's been complicated by the fact that the transition and even dependency somewhat on layer 1 ETH has just been it's messier. And I think the new token economics model also will take into account the fact that Solana will be part of that going forward. I mean, that was something that also, there wasn't a bunch of point of putting out that model until the Solana piece was announced as this is a function of how the economy of render will work. We'll have this as a tool. We'll have this as a blockchain, right? And then payments in and out will just be so much faster, and the services that we can offer so much deeper. And ultimately, I think the important piece is both node operators and artists, and even those in between that want to participate in the render ecosystem as neither, because there are people that just may want to have IP or art that they want to put into the render network and, hire artists to build things around that. I mean, I see that as being one of the bigger metaverse components of render. I mean, all those things just need to be built on a solid foundation, and Solana is going to get us there pretty quickly.
I will say that, I enjoy buying collections and NFTs and stuff like that. And the other day, the Bone World NFTs, they were built on Solana, and buying them was easy, very easy. I mean, I went onto Coinbase, bought some Solana, transferred it over to a wallet, and was able to buy it, and it was so fast. Like, having done some of the other ones, like I know the Visitors was one collection, and also just recently the Deadmau5 Deadheads. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Those, because you're working with Matic and you're working on Polygon, it's difficult to get that stuff, and it's expensive because you're having to transfer, to multiple different ways. But so when I heard the Solana news, I was really excited about that, especially being a node operator and seeing how that could benefit us.
Yeah. And I have so much to say just about the Solana ecosystem, because it's not just us, saying, hey, Solana is great for render. It's also like look at the things happening in the Solana ecosystem. And I'll start with Brave. You know, Brendan Eich is the reason why. I mean, he's the ultimate, you know, sort of validator for me that the network's the future for all of us. But even having Brave, having a browser that has like 45 million users, you know, the browser is deeply integrated with Solana. So I'm thinking that, you know, frankly, all these issues of what you do in the browser, how do you know, there's so many interesting things we could do with Basic Attention Token and Brave. We've had that partnership for years. It just has been kind of waiting for the blockchain pieces to catch up. Decentraland's another partner. I mean, a metaverse shouldn't be Facebook saying this is the metaverse or any one company. It should be a little bit of these like organizations coming together, offering these elements that are, you know, that are modular. And I feel like this is where some of those pieces really genuinely can come together, and I feel really good about that.
Now, I know that Dorpy taught us how to swap in our MetaMask, but I know a lot of people have asked a question too about, you know, will you be able to just get Render on Coinbase or some of those other platforms?
Yeah.
Are there any plans on that?
You know, those exchanges just list us whenever. So Binance just listed us, you know, I think a couple of days ago. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll be everywhere. It's just, especially I think since the Solana conference put a lot of attention on Render in the crypto space, now everyone's like, it's just, we're just a lot more of a visible project. And I expect that just like with Binance, you're just going to see all the major exchanges at some point, you know, have Render on there. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of timing. I haven't been in any rush. I feel like it's important for us to map out what Render is, where it's going. Even the Solana piece, like fundamentally, it's a good thing nobody was paying attention too much to it, because so much of what I'm seeing and hoping for and imagining for the metaverse and the future and the part that we play in it, it needs something like that to happen. And so I feel like, well, now that people are looking at it and the Solana part is a big part of that messaging, that's terrific. But yeah, a lot of things come with that as well. Obviously, being listed on exchanges like Binance without us, I mean, I don't think we even asked. I think they just did it. I didn't know. You know, I found out like 8 hours after everyone else when I woke up. So it's kind of like, yeah, there's just tons more people in the Telegram groups talking about Render. I'm active there as well, obviously, when I can. It's great. It's great to have more visibility. A lot more crypto folks are looking at Render as they should, because I think, you know, I mean, you think storage is important for the blockchain or the metaverse. I mean, compute is fundamental. Like, you can't get around that. I mean, you know, not everything's going to be done on device. Otherwise, we wouldn't need the cloud. Amazon wouldn't have a $32 billion AWS business and all that. I mean, there's a lot there that can be solved. And decentralization is a huge improvement over the system we have for centralized compute today. So it's super exciting.
Is there any talk with the folks over at Solana about them leveraging the Render network? You know?
Oh yeah. I mean, the partnership is bidirectional. So whatever we can use Solana for, they're also, I mean, you know, for Metaplex, for example, like Render is like a first, you know, it's like a built-in kind of system. I mean, we're both all in, and that's the idea of a blockchain system or platform, is that, and it's kind of what I'm trying to do even within our own tools, right? Where you have a module for Evergen or World Creator or Sculptron in the node graph. The node graph itself becomes open source. You know, the idea is that if you're using Metaplex, you can use Render, and Render has an API that allows you to programmatically do anything you want with it. It doesn't have to go through our tools. We have partners like Swatchbook that have an API that can generate renders for them. They sort of have a, you know, their own wallet to pay for those. So I see this, you know, Render itself being fundamentally, if you're building something on Solana, Render's there, along with many other services that interconnect. And that's fundamentally important. Also, Metaplex is there to help define the best way that NFTs could work and thrive on Solana, right? So if we're there in those early days helping to define that for things that are done on Render, which is a huge number of things that I think NFTs could be done in, both dynamic, you know, real time, all those things, that's critical too. So we see this contribution as being bidirectional. And I would say that with Raj, you know, who's essentially the co-founder, he's the CEO of the Solana Labs ecosystem. I mean, he sees the world of the metaverse the same way that I do, and that's open source, modular, and you know, we all are helping each other. Not a zero-sum game. It lifts up all these ships. No one's, by the way, trying to kill ETH either. It's just, this is what we have today. These are the tools, and time to market in some sense is important. Like, we waited 4 years to have some of these pieces ready. I'm not waiting another year, so I'm using Solana. Yeah.
So let's talk about some metaverse stuff. Like, I would love to talk even about like where you feel the metaverse is going. You know,
love to hear your thoughts on
about
this, Facebook's metaverse announcements and
everything. Where is the world going with the metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, I've been. This is hours of my time I could talk about the metaverse, honestly, because it does. Let me start by looking at a very high level. I will say that I agree with the general consensus that this replaces mobile, it replaces the internet, it replaces the web, it replaces in some ways social. So anything that's sort of transacted through the internet digitally is ripe for disruption for a number of reasons. And the metaverse as a label or a name is fine. I consider that accurate. So when Zuckerberg's talking about being this whole new paradigm shift, I think he's right about that. That whether or not Meta as a company, Facebook, right, previously known as Facebook, is the arbiter of what the metaverse is or isn't on an implementation level. I don't know about that. I think that it should be like the open web. I mean, that's why, everything that I think about the metaverse almost begins with what is Brendan Eich doing? He's the one that gave us an open web. An open web is really what allowed companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon and even Apple, when they started with Safari, to thrive and build multi-trillion-dollar market caps, right, that they have now. And I think that the metaverse is for sure, there's something beyond the App Store model. There's something beyond mobile. And you could say that it's augmented reality. I think that it's an obvious device type for the metaverse, because already you're going to have to rethink how these things work. The web is going to work differently. Apps are going to work differently. And I think there's such a clarity from Facebook and Apple, and maybe even you could say Epic and others, that the whole AR glasses ecosystem is going to be the starting point, right? Where, I mean, you could argue that the web didn't take off until you had the Netscape browser, or you had mobile, or you even had social media. Like, who knows where the forcing function was that made the web, the internet itself, this absolute fundamental part of daily life. But it's likely that mainstream AR is going to be a big driver towards having something very different that's metaverse-like. And I think that the metaverse should basically start with a model that is built on the blockchain, so that you essentially have one of the early lessons of the open web, baked into it, which is Brendan was saying, if I put a buy button in Firefox, there would never be the issues we have now with the app stores and 30% and all the epic Google lawsuits flying around, because there is a world where you could have easily imagined. I mean, Steve Jobs, when he first launched the iPhone, and he's like, well, Safari is your app store. He meant that literally. It wasn't until later that he's like, aha, apps and native things on the App Store, let's charge 30%, became a thing. And Mozilla was working on a system for Firefox phones that would have had security layers, so web apps could have operated as native apps. It's still possible to this day. And my goal would be to help promote a system where anybody could develop any app on any chain. Solana may be a great one to start with, but you have something that is, that isn't behind a store or a vertical. And the danger with one company like Facebook, or even Apple or Epic or NVIDIA or anyone, or, controlling a large chunk of the metaverse, is that if you're going to redo this again, you don't want that 30% tax on everything. You don't want to have a model that is only based on Facebook's current model, right, which is you're the product and your eyeballs now are your monetization piece, because it's, obviously it's not great for privacy, and it's not great for all sorts of reasons that you can see exploding already today on social media. So my vision of the metaverse is it's a way to sort of revisit all the best parts of the open web with the lessons learned from the things that went wrong with the mobile social media ecosystem we have today. And it'll be proven, at the very latest, on AR devices, where nothing is going to be the same when you have the glasses as the primary entry point into your digital experience. That doesn't mean that there won't be metaverses on iPhones, on PCs, on desktops. They'll just be different. It's a little bit like having black and white TVs in the age of color. You can kind of still watch color shows on black and white, but at some point you move to a different device, and that device is going to be spatial. So I think that's the practical parts of the metaverse. And then there's deeper pieces where I think if you're going to go and think about rebuilding the entire internet and the entire value proposition, let's start with art and content. We already see a market for digital art and owning that with NFTs that are interesting. You've seen streaming just eviscerate cable and live television. You have Disney Plus, right. These wars between these streaming providers. I see the metaverse just in the content side eliminating the Disney Pluses and the Netflixes, because if you just have one metaverse and it's like the web, and the way you discover content, even if it's all aggregated on what's so-called Disney Plus, it might not be behind an app on your TV set-top box. It might be in a very different form, and it might be that the intersections between things that are on Disney Plus and on Netflix intersect. If they're all spatial and they can all render together, and buying something or owning something or visiting something is all on the same spatial rendering service, then it becomes more like, well, if you're visiting Disney Plus and your eyeballs are seeing rays of light bounced off a Disney Plus piece, those are tracked. That's what the idea of Brave, which was ads that are privacy-based, that are based on the surface area in the browser, are interesting. You could do ads, you could do monetization based on your visitation in the metaverse, and that could be a different model on top of the streaming subscriber model. They can all be there, but that's the kind of stuff that the metaverse might allow you to genuinely open up, when there's not this verticalization or barriers between apps, platforms, and ecosystems, especially with a layer where every single piece of transaction could be charged for, could be subscribed to. You have those options. You don't quite have that easily on the web, and that's been a fundamental dividing factor, I think, in the mobile market we have today, and the reason why ads are so prevalent even on social media, because there hasn't been great monetization models through the web itself.
And I'm sure the render network is going to be involved in things like, rendering AR on the fly and all of that based on those models. And then, of course, which would need a lot more power, but the light field stuff, the holographic stuff that we know is coming eventually in real life, all of that. Gosh, especially that stuff, because I forget, you were telling us like the ridiculous amount of GPU power that some of that stuff needs right now. But how do you see render itself falling into this metaverse? Besides the render stuff, I guess, that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So I think, yes, the render stuff is fairly straightforward as far as like if you want to create digital art and you want that to go on chain or even create spaces that people can visit in the metaverse, right? That's fairly obvious. We have real time with Brigade. We have integration with Unreal. You can publish those pieces, and monetization or not, those are elements the render network will support. You need to have, even if you have the same compute power on your iPhone, the fact that, like, let's say the enterprise model, the one that I showed at the Apple event, is 100 gigabytes. You don't want to necessarily download that, and you don't want everyone. So there may be a case where it's like just render it on the network where it's already cached, it's on the edge or whatever, and those kinds of things are important for AR. And we can do streaming AR. It's actually not that hard because you have the depth data, and this is how NVIDIA does their Cloud XR, which is an API that streams from NVIDIA servers to any generic sort of AR or VR device. That's a pretty well-known system or method. So I'm not concerned at all about using render to stream to AR and having those effects work nicely. I think that's, the area of deep work and research that we're going to be building on top of Brigade, on top of Unreal and Unity and other integrations next year. But where I see the more interesting elements in the metaverse is sort of exemplified by the render archives. And we have 3 of these that we started. One was Beeple. I mentioned that briefly, where all of Beeple's work that he's ever done, it's on chain. He can just hit render and it can basically create one of his everydays. It's from the C4D file, from the Photoshop PSD that's at the output of it. And those can then be, new ones can be built, right, that are dynamic, that are oracles. But I think the more, the other 2 render archives are really intriguing. One of them is Alex Ross's archive. He's a comic book painter and artist. He's the one that paints me as Marvel and DC superheroes, right? But his art is 2D. But for 20 years, we've been building 3D versions of all of his paintings. It's like bringing to life. And he's done paintings that have redone, like, Avengers #1, Fantastic Four #1, Action Comics #1 with Superman. Like, they're Alex Ross paintings that are beautiful, lifelike, paintings, Norman Rockwell-like paintings of these comic book events. And here we are now rebuilding those in 3D. And those are not necessarily for NFTs. They're just to have those moments of the DC Universe and Marvel Universe brought to life for posterity. That's what he wants and we want for his work. And, that's one path. On the other side, with the Roddenberry archive, yes, all of the documents, there's millions of documents. If you see the video that we put out with Gene Roddenberry's estate, that's all there. But we're also taking the blueprints from the team that worked for 30 years on Star Trek, Darren Dotterman, the Kudas, Doug Drexler, and we're rebuilding the Enterprise down to the nuts and bolts. The toilet's flush. You can push every button. It's completely insane. And the hardest part is we spent 6 months just figuring out exactly where that goes. Like, not even the work of the 3D model. Like, oh my God, no, this has to be this place. Because some of it was never filmed. Some of these things don't even fit. So you'll end up at the end of this project with, for the Smithsonian level quality of museum, which is where this will go. The team also worked on the 11-foot Smithsonian model that's hanging there. You'll have a digital version of the real Enterprise, and you'll be able to go back and forward in time and space, because it's literally like the ship of Theseus. It was rebuilt in 2270. Before that, it was the TV version. It blew up in 2285. So you have this 40-year world line in its universe. And then you have the alternate universes. You have the JJ version. You have all the ships before and after that were named Enterprise, which is very meta, right? And then you have the actual physical models in our universe, which is what I consider, modal reality. In other words, certain types of fiction include our world. You break the fourth wall, you're in our universe. Marvel actually has a number for the real world that we live in. It's called Earth 1218. The Marvel Universe is 616, so on and so forth. So the metaverse is an object that is the thing itself, the platonic abstract form of the Enterprise. It is not the 3D model. It's all possible 3D models as determined by the creator. And you can view it in the universe of Star Trek. It's canonicized in a sense by its what appeared on TV and what we can then rebuild. Like we can rebuild those each moment of that show, in render, and which is crazy. And then you can explore that world or live in it or have branching stories. But you also have the ability to see in the real world where it came from, how it was done. And this modal reality system, that to me is the metaverse. And that's what we minted for Gene Roddenberry's 100th birthday and the archive system itself. I took all of the render we've ever had, most of it we burnt when we switched to a new chain. And I'm like, well, this is like the seed function for the archives. You can't buy or trade or sell it. You can just add to it. So it is a little bit like it's a not for profit system where you can put your artwork in there, but you can then point to that and make an NFT and say, well, this is my work in the metaverse or in this metaverse indexing system. That's what that M token was for. And that M token starts with like all of the work between Gene Roddenberry, Alex Ross, Yes Even People, and all of that has each of these have their own Earth universes, narrative fictionally, where they interconnect, and they use the same system for the gravitational constant of the universe or things that are related. And that's kind of how. That's what that token's there for. So you can start to build things, and you can start to use assets. So for the Star Trek, archive, we built like the entire solar system. We hired artists to do that, and we worked with NASA to get their entire star system in there, so we know where Vulcan is. Like Roddenberry picked a planet or a star system for that. The Federation's light cone is only like 200 light years. It's not that far out. So you're in the Star Trek universe. You will go to warp, and you'll see those stars correctly rendered because we're going to add that entire system in there. But if you want to just have a star field that's correct for your NFT, well, those assets are there in anything that you want to do. So that is where that M for Metaverse, archive is for. It's for this kind of artistic ontology or organization, a little bit like IMDb or Wikipedia for the metaverse. That's necessary, and I bet everything on sort of starting that system is a really fundamental piece that we could start, and we could add important elements like the Roddenberry story of Star Trek and Alex Ross's Marvel and DC work, and have that be a basis for other works to bridge and connect from people is like the first that's like wildly, unique and native, I guess, to the crypto art world, but it could go from there. The
Beepleverse. The site, m.x.io. That is M
just a
is for
placeholder,
Metaverse.
really.
Yeah.
M is for Metaverse. The other thing that's interesting about that is I also signed it. So when we did the August minting of that, it was on Roddenberry's 100th birthday and all that. There's 100 million concept tokens. They're just there. You can use those virtually. So if you wanted to have, if you wanted, for example, have like who won this, World Series and this thing, it's like those things are all there. All those concepts inside of the Octane node graph or the render node graph, that's where you can pull those in and you can add, and new ones will be added. Like we can just keep adding more and more every month. And they're not from Wikipedia, they're from Wikidata, which is a much more organized database, and we can add more elements in there. But with those pieces, you can have, instead of having a ray switch node, you can have a concept switch node. And concepts themselves can be used to determine how materials, textures, your node graph works. And that's all in there as well. So you have planets, you have realities, you have fictional things, all there. But more importantly, you also have a lot of different layers for creating dynamic NFTs and also things that are conceptually scalar functions or things that you can build and test and create, essentially graphs around. And I think that's super cool.
Man, y'all should hear some of the conversations that we have off the air about Star Trek, Star Wars, Marvel. Yeah. That's fun. There's a question that I wanted to hit up while we're talking about the metaverse. You had the Render the Metaverse competition a while back. Now I feel like it has a whole new meaning. And the question is, do you have any plans to do that again?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that there is, I wouldn't even call it Render the Metaverse 2, because I feel like continuity wise, everything that was rendered on Render the Metaverse in 2015, I think it was, it counts, and that is actually something we can put on chain. So we're going to start it up again. And I think what we want to do is we want to get the Solana pieces going. We want to get Metaplex going so that you have those pieces easily there, but it'll be different. Like before we had, Facebook put up this money and whoever won got the money. And I want to have something that's much more deeply tied to the metaverse and the render. And we will start Render the Metaverse again, probably sometime in the first half of next year. And I think it'll go on forever is my vision. And there'll be ways for artists to continuously contribute to that. The M for Metaverse piece will be an option. It won't, you can use that as well to build artwork and do things. But I want to have something that really does benefit like the top 10,000 artists in our ecosystem, and offer something pretty interesting as a system and not just a temporary contest. So Render the Metaverse will absolutely be back next year. and it'll be metaverse, truly metaverse ready. Now that the metaverse is much closer than it was back in 2014 and 2015, when we did the first round of the metaverse with Alex and Carmack and me as the judges.
What do you think about? This is an interesting question about streaming in the future, because on something decentralized, I imagine that that's not really streaming compatible in that way. Where do you see streaming falling in all of this, and how would that work?
So just to be clear, you talking about live streaming for 3D or live streaming of?
Well, I guess
video?
Actually that could be anything in this case, right? It could be live streaming. It could be 3D stuff, you know.
So I did a tweet where I showed. I think it was Gary Kim's did an Unreal NFT, and we're streaming that in a browser page, right? And that's an example of a live stream of something that is created art. I think that streaming is fundamental to the metaverse piece, because if you're experiencing something, like I'll give the enterprise as an example, we're going to have two modes where it's pre-computed as a light field, or it's live and you can render it, kind of in an offline way, which is maximum fidelity, for viewing or for a holographic panel. But the streaming piece is where I think it's fundamental to be able to visit these large data sets. And I think that one of the reasons why we're picking Solana is that if you're changing something in that live stream that the whole world has to then accept as consensus reality, we need a blockchain where I'm not trying to do all the physics and everything on chain, but I need the finalization of those physics, the placement. If you're going to go into Kurt's room and move the coffee mug, which there is a coffee mug in his room, right? 1 foot to the left, and you're the one that can do that, or you decide to do it, or you throw it at the wall. There needs to be something that does that, and the streaming piece is where those interactions can happen. And I think for artists as well, there's a whole other area where I see you have a lot of Twitch streams for people playing games, and you have a lot of live streams for people doing and creating art. And one of the things I'd like to do with Render is have it so that as you're creating artwork, especially if we have the ability to load in Blender and Unreal, and even if your Cinema 4D scene can be in there, it's like having live collaborative work sessions where people are building these things together and recording that could be cool. I mean, that's something that feels like it's a pretty straightforward element. And headless render is a big part of that too, because you can start with any app that's locally. You don't even have to have it on the chain, but as long as that's a transmitter to the render network headlessly, the scene itself gets transmitted. It gets rendered on some node on chain, and all of that kind of works in this homogeneous way. And so that's where I see streaming of data, streaming of scenes, all those things come into play. We're in sort of a high latency offline job world right now for render, and NFTs are sort of that way. And I think that things that are live streamed are still kind of like, well, this is an appified or Unreal Engine game versus a persistent world that can be truly transformed persistently. Although you do get that with Decentraland. I think our place in the metaverse is to provide a system where those things become straightforward for artists and creators, and any renderer or any system that's looking for some sort of consensus or open standards to build on. And I should say that Otoy and the render network itself, Orbex is an open standard. It's called ITMF. We submitted it to Cable Labs. We want to, really make all the data itself be built on open specs, and that's why we brought in the Arnold guys and others. We want to see there be standards for the metaverse. It's so fundamentally important.
Whew. Anything else? Anything else we want to talk about? I don't know about. I don't know if you have any updates on light field technology or anything. I know everybody's just curious when it's going to be mainstream.
Anything new with the holographic stuff?
Yeah.
Well, September. I don't think I did a show. Since this happened with you guys, right? But September, CNET and the press were invited to Lightfield Labs to see the actual 20-inch display. Yeah, and so you guys, anyone that wants to check it out, we should include a link maybe at the podcast where they can see the CNET hands-on, experience with it. And,
is that the one with the gecko or something in it? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
The gecko. The gecko. And we are, by the way, testing the enterprise on there. So I can tell you that it takes 14 cents to render at 720p on the render network, but it's 1,000 times more work to render that same enterprise for one frame to run on that light field display, because it's 1,000 times the number of rays. It's crazy. So offline rendering, so real-time rendering keeps going into this sphere where probably what you could do now in Brigade blows past even what you could probably render in offline renders 10 years ago, right? Even pre-Octane. And then we're at but that doesn't mean that we're done with offline rendering. We just have more things that can be offline rendered at a higher fidelity, at a higher capacity. And so real-time and offline are both accelerating. Both will be supported by render, but holographic displays are particularly tough and tricky because they just require a ton more rays just to have a holographic standing white light hologram come out of that emissive display. So yeah, 1,000x. It's crazy. It's 10 gigapixels per square meter. massive amount of GPU power just to get a still frame. We're working on how to get it to run in real time, but it's probably going to be using a light field as an intermediate format to get even that to run. So it's still going to require render. And my hope is that those displays, now that they're real, like you'll probably see artists like Mike or people, do physical displays with those in there, museums, concerts, Smithsonian. As I said, that the enterprise we're building could be in the Smithsonian, more likely through a holographic display. Like they could, if somebody were to fund that, they will get cheaper. They will be the cost of an OLED panel at some point, probably in the 2030s, 10 years from now. And then everyone will have those maybe in their place of windows. So you don't have to put on a pair of glasses, which is still a point of friction for some people to experience the metaverse spatially, which I think would be great.
Oh, man, I can't wait.
Yes.
Anything else before we go? I think we've covered quite a bit, and I'm guessing you might have to use the restroom after 2.5 hours. We got to take a break. You didn't.
Yeah.
So
I'm good.
I'm excited to hang out on Saturday and talk more.
Me too.
It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, that'd be great. I can't wait.
Yeah.
cool.
All right. Well, let's get out of the drop.
Yeah.
If anyone who's listening has an NFT that they're dropping, shoot us an email, info@mograph.com, and we'll show it on the show. Yeah, let's get back to the other part.
All right.
Drop. Is this the fucking mic? This is exactly what I should be doing.